last year was my senior year. In about November of 2021, which is about the middle of our season, I had made it my goal to win a national title. And middle through of our season, I was ranked third in the nation behind one amazing female athlete who I was very familiar with because, like most sports, your top tier athletes tend to know each other.
Yep.
But ranking first was a person I had never heard of before. And of course, this name was Leah Thomas. But at the time, just looking at this on paper, it didn't really make much sense to me because this person was a senior and I'd never heard of them and came out of nowhere and was leading the nation by multiple seconds in multiple events ranging from the 100 free, which is a sprint, all the way to a mile, which is a distance event. And so typically, I mean, think of running, your fastest 200-meter runner is not gonna be your fastest 5K runner.
Yeah.
And so there were so many red flags, but it never once occurred to me that this could be a man just because that was so far out of reach.
Yeah.
A couple days after these nation-leading times were posted, an article was posted disclosing that Leah Thomas did in fact formerly swim on the men's team for 3 years. And so I'm reading this and I'm like, wait, so this is a guy? And when I read this, I was shocked, of course, but I truthfully felt relieved because when you look up Will Thomas at this point, you can see that they were ranked 462nd at best.
Yeah, couldn't cut it in the men's.
In the men's division. And so seeing that on paper, I thought surely the NCAA wouldn't let this person compete with us. But of course, that's not what we saw. And so that first day at our NCAA championships, we all sat on the sidelines as Leah Thomas became the fastest female in the country, winning a national title in the 500 freestyle, beating out, Olympians, American record holders, the fastest females of all time. And that next day was when Leah and I raced each other, and we swam the 200 freestyle, and crazily enough, we tied. So when we went the exact same time down to the 100th of a second, which is pretty rare.
Yeah.
And so upon tying, I go behind the awards podium where they give you these like dinky little trophies and they parade you out. But the NCAA official looks at me and says, "Great job, y'all tied. The trophy goes to Leah.
What?
We'll eventually mail you yours." And so I kind of look at him and I quickly question him and I'm like, okay, I understand there's one trophy, don't account for ties, but what's your thought process on giving it to Leah? Why are you so adamant? And he said, well, for photo purposes, Leah has to have it. So, of course, we knew going into the meet we would be competing against each other, but we were not forewarned in any capacity that we would be sharing a locker room. And so the swimming locker room, it's not necessarily a place of modesty. You've grown up swimming, especially when you're at the elite level that we were, you put these suits on that are like skin tight. It takes like 15 minutes to put these suits on. So it's a process to which, of course, you have to be undressed. But as a girl growing up in that environment, you become okay with being vulnerable in that situation because everyone there is in the same situation. And it's a place of chatter. You get to see your friends from all over the country who you haven't seen in so long. And so I was in the locker room, obviously putting my suit on, and all of a sudden it got dead silent. I turn around. This person's towering over every other person in the locker room, drops the clothes, full male, like a fully intact male with male genitalia. And almost subconsciously, you just cover. It's just a subconscious inherent feeling when you see a male with male parts watching you undress. It was like, I thought I was missing something. I thought, am I like not grasping something? Why is no one talking about this? Why is a coach not sticking up for us? Why is someone within the NCAA, why were we not warned? We did not give our consent for this. No one asked us.
Yeah, you fucking trans-fucking bitch, I fucking see you. Trans rights are human rights! Trans rights are human rights!
Trans rights are human rights!
her to pay us. Tell her to pay us and she can go. 10 bucks each. She might go pay for this shit, so we can go pay for this shit.
Riley Gaines. She's a spokeswoman with the Independent Women's Forum and former swimmer at the University of Kentucky. Riley, I mean, the president also said the event was deeply traumatic for the students, but not for you who was actually assaulted, apparently. Your response tonight to what you just heard?
I mean, you can't even make this up. Exactly like you said, this is what higher institutions are doing, universities, where children are going to learn. This is what they're teaching them. They also responded in the email with saying, you know, we know how hard it can be to hear other perspectives, so here are some counseling resources for you students who were so brave. My response is we must have different definitions of peaceful, because these videos, what I heard, what I endured for 3 hours sitting barricaded in a room where they demanded money if I wanted to safely make it home, that is not peaceful, that's kidnapping and extortion.
Now, Jamila Moore, as I said, that staffer that sent the email out to the students, Riley, following your event, also said that we value different ideas even when they're not our own. But then yesterday, you tweeted that it was this individual, Jamila Moore, blocked you on Twitter.
I remember when I lost my mind.
Hello, yes, I thought I should probably address this comment. I identify as gray gender, which means I feel ties to certain genders, but it's really hard to describe, it's really hard to define. For me, it's really close to being gender fluid.
There. I'm Cody, pronouns em, ers, or zem, zers, or really any neo pronouns that aren't z, her, hers. I am a white transmasculine femme non-binary, temporarily mostly able-bodied, neurodivergent, obsessive-compulsive, chronically ill, culturally Jewish, Unitarian Universalist, non-monogamous, demi-low romantic, gray demi-bisexual, survivor of acute and complex trauma, millennial, and cat parent in mental health recovery.
3 ways to let your friends know what gender you're feeling today! Gender fluid edition!
PSA that you don't have to do any of these, these are just things that I do. 1. Pronoun bracelets. You can get different coloured bracelets with different pronouns on. For example, this one says she, her, this one says he, him, and this one says they, them. The colours also correspond to how I'm feeling, so black usually goes with my black male outfits. This usually goes with like my pink female outfits, and this usually goes with my non-binary outfit.
So Magpie's pronoun set is it, bug, dirt, they, right? It and they are used normally. So its name is Magpie.
If you don't live into the transgender, you're cast out as a company.
What is emoji self? Emoji self is a gender-neutral form of neo-pronouns where an individual will replace a pronoun with an emoji.
I'm glad you asked. Let's talk about it. So tri-gender and the way you identify in it can be very heavily based on your culture and your cultural background.
So they, them, their, themself. Or if that's still a little bit confusing, 2 of my friends call me Star Child, and if I started using Star and Star Self, they would start using it while calling me Star Child, so that just seems a little bit redundant. And then I was like, the moon! Moon and moon self. I also use glitch and glitch self.
I am genderful. I feel gender. I'm like gender chaotic. Something like that. So it makes sense that I might want to change.
Hi Tammy, thanks for asking. So polygender literally just means multiple genders or many gender.
When people started watching and the numbers kept getting higher, I realized quickly how public my transition would be. Of course,
I've already cried 3 times.
Here's my update. Sorry for the delay. My life is chaos on how I clicker trained my family to get my correct pronouns now that I'm a trans person.
I went ahead and started using the women's restroom at work for the last week. Nothing bad happened. Very, very stressful.
Biological sex is fake. Yes, we all know that gender roles are fake, but do not say to a trans person, biologically male, born female.
So, for example, I, Addison, use they, them pronouns.
I am a Therian. I believe that my soul is an animal soul.
I go through stages of feeling feminine, non-binary, and sometimes boyish. So that's meow.
You only use this one on rare occasions because overall we're a very happy kid and family.
Oh, meow. Meow.
I just added bug to my list of pronouns, so here's a very quick tutorial on how to use bugs pronouns in sentences.
I have a serious fucking question, okay? What about this outfit and this person screams woman? How do I keep getting this gender?
Today I'm going to be teaching you how to use frogs pronouns in sentences, so let's go!
Yes, I am also very nervous for you just because hopefully soon transphobia won't be as tolerated online, but your tweets are forever and I don't want those to come back and haunt you. Okay? Bye.
Because I very recently discovered, by very recently I mean like this very morning, that I am a non-binary man.
Day 12 of being a girl, and we're gonna go buy tampons. Let's go.
Where are they even at?
What the?
I don't know, which one should I get?
You may refer to me as it's.
Hi, my name's Jasper. I use they pronouns.
Hi, my name is Liana. I use they demon pronouns.
The reason why I hate biological men, and you should too. If you don't know who I am, my name is Blossom. I use they, them pronouns. And it's not because I hate men. That's not what we're talking about right now. There's no such thing as biological men. That's not a real thing. That is a transphobic dog whistle.
Just some food for thought. But if you ask me my pronouns, and I say I use any pronouns, and you only use she, her, you're a fucking loser.
This is one of my goals of the book also, is to educate parents so that they understand the background. So you mentioned John Money. Of course, this goes back to John Money. John Money introduced the idea of gender identity. He coined the term gender identity, and he said that the gender identity is completely separate from biology, and that it is one's identity as male or female, because back then, of course, we didn't have the non-binary and, in between all that, 47 different genders stuff. So in the 50s, when John Money was writing and speaking about all this, we had male and female. And his theory was that male and female is something that is foisted on a baby, a child, by society, and that it is unrelated to biology. He further said that men and women, males and females, have biological distinctions, but they are limited to menstruating, gestating, and lactating. And that was it. Aside from those three things, everything else in terms of personality and preferences for activities or, cognitive abilities, emotional styles, perceptions, that is all, it's a social construct, okay? It's all put on the child in the first 2.5 to 3 years of life. And then John Money said it's fixed. So, when you put the pink blanket on the little girl and the blue blanket on the boy, and then you give them the toys and you give them, you have certain expectations based on whether it's a boy or a girl. And all those things, the frilly dresses and the 50s was a time, of course, of stereotypes. So he spoke about it in terms of, the girl's going to be in the kitchen making cookies and the boy's going to be out, fixing the car with his dad. John Money's specialty, his interest was in hermaphrodites, okay? Very rare babies that are born with ambiguous genitalia. And those ambiguous genitalia are due to some congenital issue, either endocrinological or due to chromosomal abnormality. And the baby is born, they take a look at the genitals, it's just not clear what's going on. And that's where the term comes from. This is important. Assigned sex at birth. Assigned. Because in those cases, and these were the cases that John Money became an expert in, and he opened up a center specifically having to do with, his PhD that he wrote in the 50s was on the issue of sex assignment of hermaphrodites. What do you do? It's a crisis. You have to say we had a girl or we had a boy. And so what do you do in those cases? And he had a special interest in this. Now, you and I know that when someone has a certain interest in their life that consumes them to the point that they're writing their PhD about it, they're studying it, they make it their career, there's usually a reason behind it. And it's worthwhile exploring that reason. Now, when you look at John Money, and his early life, and he wrote about this, he was very open about it. He grew up under the hand of an abusive, alcoholic, out of control father who would beat him and his mother. So John Money as a child was not only beaten, but watched his mother being beaten. He no doubt had a terrible childhood, and that influenced his image of masculinity was this monstrous individual. And he wrote later on, he grew up on a farm, by the way, and he wrote later on in one of his books that he realized that the world might be better off if not only animals, but men were gelded at birth, castrated.
You might be disappointed in the results.
So he said that the world might be a better place if men were gelded. And he also wrote, he said, I wear the vile mark of male sexuality. His genitals were vile to him. That is gender dysphoria. We didn't call it then. We didn't have a name for it back then. So clearly, John Money was uncomfortable, to say the very least, with his own masculinity and his own body. So it's not a surprise that he would come up with a theory that, if true, would comfort him on some level. That he is not going to become his father. He's not his father. Even though he shares the same type of physical reality, his body, his genitals are of a man. But if his theory is true, and there's such a thing as gender, which is completely separate than biology, then it gave John Money like a way out of not identifying with a monster.
I never tell parents, period. On their survey at the beginning of the year, when it asked for preferred name and pronouns, it also asked for what you want me to refer to you as when I call home and what pronouns to use. So then I just make sure when I'm calling home, I use what they prefer when I call home. Even if someone told me I couldn't do that and I couldn't call them whatever they want or the pronouns they want without parent permission, I would still do it.
A kindergarten teacher is facing outrage after discussing gender identity with her students.
The kindergartners came home very confused about whether or not you can pick your gender, whether or not they really were a boy or a girl.
Many parents say they feel betrayed and blindsided.
I want her to hear from me as a parent what her gender identity means to her. My daughter went home crying, shaking, so afraid that she could turn into a boy.
There's never a time when a teacher needs to sit down with kids and tell them that, hey, you know, you're a boy, but you might actually be a girl.
So I thought I'd bring you an update of the whole gender identity situation and how I'm handling it in my classroom.
Something really inspiring and also a little bit concerning I'm hearing a lot of teachers talk about is asking students their pronouns. That's why this year I created these survey cards that ask students their pronouns, if they're comfortable with me using those pronouns in front of their peers, and definitely if they're comfortable with me using those pronouns with their parents and families.
I've come out to my students. All my students know that I'm non-binary. Most of my students call me mixed. Most of the staff at the schools call me mix or coach, either one.
One of my students felt safe enough to share his pronouns with me.
My favorite part of the day, though, was in the last class that I went to, there was a kid that says, "Oh my gosh, you're non-binary. So is my sister. Look at this picture of them." Right? Isn't that awesome? And that's why I'm out. That's why I'm visible. That's why representation matters. Heck yeah.
I got cornered by 3 of my 6th grade students at lunch today, and they came up to me all excited. They were like, Miss Collins, what's your sexuality?" And I said, "Why do you need to know that right now?" And they were like, "Oh, I don't know. I just think you'd be like a super fun, like, bi or pan person."
I'm a man, but when I was a baby, the doctors told my parents I was a girl. And until I was 18 years old, everyone thought I was a girl. And this was super, super uncomfortable for me.
It's International Pronouns Day. I'm a non-binary elementary school teacher, so here's how I talk to my students about pronouns and such.
Such nonsense is merely an effort to normalize the transgender social contagion that legitimate experts agree is most often
Mr. Broadwell,
an
I want to warn you against hate
undiagnosed
speech against
psychological
the
problem.
community.
What?
I want to warn you about hate speech. That's not allowed during public
Why is that
comment.
hate speech?
It's considered hate speech.
By who?
You called them a social contagion.
That's what it is.
It is hate speech, Mr. Broadwell. Will not
That's
be,
hate speech?
It will not be allowed during this public comment. Your opinions
Okay.
are fine. Everyone plays.
Step 1. You upload a tiny picture of yourself. What?
What was the first one?
It's on record. It is Girl in Translation and it is mandatory reading for 10th grade honors. Do a sex meet the trick in public place for a drink first. Number 173, page 173, doing the sex. A good handy is all about the wrist action. Rub the head of his COCK back and forth with your hand. Blowies. Oral sex, it's popping another dude's peen into your mouth.
Okay, can you move on to the next one?
So, Feminist Current writes, why isn't anyone talking about the influence of porn on the trans trend? In recent years, trans pornography has soared in popularity. According to Pornhub's metadata, both trans and transgender porn searches have more than quadrupled in the 3 years between 2014 to 2017, and by 2018, trans was ranked the 5th highest search term of the year. A specific type of porn that men who have rapid onset gender confusion attribute their confusion to this. So Ali Stuckey, our great friend Ali Stuckey, dug up an old tweet from this guy Chris on the Mr. Beast show. And she said, in a tweet that he just deleted, Chris from Mr. Beast, who recently announced he's transitioning to a woman, says he likes Loli, which is L-O-L-I, which is a form of anime porn in which female characters are depicted as children or even babies. Man, many such cases among trans men.
Chris's announcement of being on hormone replacement therapy really took the internet by shock for the simple fact that prior, Chris had been known as sort of the all-American, like, gun-toting, like, guy.
It's just I want to build my willpower. My willpower is weak.
No, but you quit
there.
selling drugs and you quit watching porn. You have good willpower. You have great willpower.
That took a while. And also it took some bad events.
But you did quit. That's
True.
what willpower is about.
True.
Also, he's discussed what type of porn he's into. What kind?
I was just into everything, brother. I went down some dark alleys.
What's the dark?
The darkest alley? T's.
T's?
The T.
The fucking T100s. T1000s? What's that? What are you talking about?
T's.
What's the Terminator T1000?
Yeah.
He ran into some T1000s.
The boys and the girls. When the boys become girls.
When the boys become girls. Then the boys. The T's. Trans. He liked the T's. That could be an issue.
Joe, I'll tell you, it is.
You don't want to get caught with that.
Well, here's the thing. It's just a ramping up of like talking about super normal stimuli, dude. That's why I'm so passionate about that. It's like your brain, you need like the edge. This was my problem with it. I didn't have a drug problem. I could never like stop drugs or whatever. But then it's like you get the blood flowing on sex stuff. It's like that's not getting it flowing. You go to like something a little bit more kind of out there, and then you finally you land on those shores. And
My God, where am I going? That was like
trying to assemble the raft. It's all fucked up. You're like, oh, I got
one of our first episodes is he's explaining he watches it. I was like, what the fuck? And then he was like, give it a shot. So I was like, I'm open-minded.
Dude, I'm telling you, it's a silent epidemic, dude. And I'm not projecting this onto the masses.
Silent epidemic?
I believe so.
Dudes into T's?
Yes. I truly believe so. I truly believe so. Dude, I actually know if you read the book, what is it, fucking A Billion Wicked Lies, A Billion Wicked Thoughts, where they crunch the fucking metadata from the internet, and it's like, it's doing numbers, dude.
You are such an awesome mom for bringing your kid out to a family-friendly drag show, ladies and gentlemen.
If you are attempting to figure out if you want to go no contact, let me give you a tip.
Screwed
Go
up.
no contact.
That's
first.
why I made a Patreon. We could connect in a way that has more privacy, so that we could talk to each other in a way that's more open, and stuff that we wouldn't share like in the comments of a video like this. Spend more connected time.
I want to talk to all the trans kids for a second. So if you're a trans kid, get comfortable for a couple minutes, and if you're the parent of a trans kid, then bring them over to the phone or bring the phone over to them, whatever works.
We offer chest binders in the sizes extra small to 5XL. We offer packing briefs from sizes extra small to 3XL. And we offer tucking gaffs from the sizes extra small to 2XL.
And get up on stage and entertain people. Everybody should try drag at least once. It's really fun.
Even kids?
Yeah.
This screenshot from Eli's Instagram. It's a picture of Eli holding up this pill, and he writes, "There are over 20 states trying to criminalize hormone therapy, particularly for trans youth. So my friends and I had an idea, sending out our extra prescriptions around the country. If you need hormones, I'm working with a distribution network to get you access. Everything is free, no questions asked. We have hundreds of doses of testosterone, estradiol, and spironolactone available right now.
If you need a family, you can come hang out with me. They may not see the real you, but that does not mean that you're not real. I love you very much."
Meet Australia's youngest drag queen, 13-year-old Candy Featherbottom, also known as Logan out of drag.
Hi everybody, I'm Candy Featherbottom.
And 15-year-old Queen Cherry West.
Hi kids! There's no such thing as a boy or a girl, and I can prove it.
Another blaring example
Drag Queen Storytime. It's happening in Canada and America, where some public schools and libraries invite drag queens, some dressed like torn demons, to read to young children.
And it's a social deconstructionist agenda. They're using children, little 5-year-olds, to accomplish this, and parents are waking up and saying no.
Sit up here and tell a lesbian that this whole dude with body parts of a dude is a woman. That's backwards. Like, how do we even get here? To even having this conversation in the first place, we're having to explain that a guy has male parts. That's it.
But because the idea that gender is fluid, because in reality it is not. It is a danger to children for the reasons that I stated above. Gays Against Groomers has educated the public on numerous occasions on what we stand for, and I will echo that here today. Gays Against Groomers is a coalition of gay people who do not stand for the sexualization, medicalization, or indoctrination of children. What adults do with their body is up to them, but leave the kids alone. Yes.
So let's walk through what happened with Money. So he got involved in a very famous case, which
he
is
certainly
worth
did.
laying out.
He certainly did. But let's just tell your audience furthermore that he wrote his PhD on hermaphrodites and on how to assign their sex. And then he went on to open the first clinic in the United States for hermaphrodites for their treatment, including their surgeries. So he made available, for the first time in the United States, a place where there would be gender reassignment or sex reassignment, including the surgeries. And the surgeries involved castration,
gave us the tools
of course.
to brainwash ourselves. Literally wash out our humanness from our brain.
The basic idea of Heaven's Gate was that you would chemically and biologically transform your body.
I said, we're going to proceed doing the castration. Who's going to go first?
Do exactly as I say, and you will not know death.
By killing themselves, they ensured their immortality.
So he had his theory, and he didn't have any way of proving it. Because, I mean, how do you prove something like that? Until this family showed up at his doorstep, and it was a Canadian family from Winnipeg, I think, right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And they were the Reamer family, a blue-collar, very young couple, 20, 21 years old. And they had a horrific tragedy in their family, which is that they gave birth to twin boys. The boys were fine. And when the boys were, well, actually they had phimosis. Phimosis is a abnormality of the opening of the urethra at the tip of the penis. The boys had phimosis. And so the doctors recommended circumcision for the boys. And they went in when they were 8 months old for circumcision. And the first boy to go in for the circumcision was Bruce. And the equipment, there was a malfunction of the equipment. And they were cauterizing the penis in order to circumcise it. And instead of just that small amount of tissue that was supposed to be cauterized, apparently the settings were incorrect and the entire penis was burnt. So Bruce's penis was burnt, beyond any functionality. So these poor parents went home. The other boy was not circumcised, just obviously. They went home, and what are they supposed to do? They have a boy without a penis. What the hell are they supposed to do? So months later, they were watching television, and John Money happened to be on there.
Of human personality.
And you have to know also that John Money was an extremely pompous, self-assured individual. He was sophisticated. When he talked, you listened. He came across as being definitive, being, calling the shots, knowing what was going on, knowing the research, knowing the truth. And he in this interview on television, said that a boy can be raised as a girl and a girl can be raised as a boy if it's caught, if it's done early enough. And that early enough means before the age of 2.5 or 3.
Dr. Money?
And the parents, the Reamer parents, immediately took note of that, and they thought, here's the answer. This is the answer for Bruce. This is what we're supposed to do. So they contacted Dr. Money down in Baltimore, and they made an appointment and took the twins down to Baltimore and went down there. Again, you have to understand that this was a uneducated, young blue-collar family, and when they were interviewed later about their meetings with John Money, they described him as like, we just thought he was God. Mm-hmm. We just thought, he's a professor and he's, got all the diplomas and he's the head of this entire
new
clinic. At an outstanding university, one of the major universities in the world.
That was at Johns Hopkins, right?
Yes,
yeah, right.
Yes. So you have to imagine this young couple coming, and they're at a loss, and they are looking for an answer. They've been praying, they're looking for an answer to their prayers. What are we going to do with Bruce? And John Money says, well, we have an answer for you. Because male and female is actually not related to chromosomes. It's not related to hormones. It's not innate. We can take little Bruce and we have to do some surgery on Bruce. We have to castrate him and we'll remove his testicles. He already didn't have a penis. We're gonna remove his testicles. We're gonna fashion, some sort of elementary sort of female genitalia. You're gonna give him a girl's name and you're gonna put him in pink dresses and give him dolls and raise him as a girl. And you are never, ever, Dr. Money told the parents, never to tell him that this was truly what happened and after he was born. Never tell him, because that will ruin everything. And it's up to you. You have to just work your hardest to raise him as a girl and make sure that everyone around him is considering him a girl, because essentially he is a girl. And so not only was this the answer to the Reamer's prayers, this was, as you can understand now, the answer to Dr. Money's prayers.
Right. He had an experiment.
This was the experiment. This was his proof of concept. His concept was that being male and female is completely separate from biology. It's imposed by society. It's a social construct. And this was his proof of concept. And so the Reamers went home. Well, he had his surgery. They took him home. They named Bruce Brenda. They put him in all the girls' clothing and they gave him dolls and they did all the things. And he peed sitting down sometimes, because as we'll learn later, he actually preferred urinating standing up, which is astonishing. We learned later that he always wanted to urinate standing up. And from the time he was in diapers, he was told he was a girl. So that really is fascinating. But Dr. Money would take the twins without the parents into his office and spend time with the twins. So this went on for years. And Dr. Money began to report on his study that became a famous landmark study. And he called them, he called her Joan in his study. He was beginning to write about this and lecture. And he was claiming that Joan, AKA Brenda, AKA Bruce, was doing great. I mean, she was adjusting. She may be a bit of a tomboy. He would acknowledge that. But in every way, you know, she was adjusting and she was doing well with friends and with schools. And she liked playing with dolls and she would mimic her mom. And he was giving this glowing, glowing report from year to year. And in his professional writing of his studies, his report, and he was giving talks. And he was getting, you might imagine, tremendous attention for this. I mean, you have to understand, this was by now maybe, the early 60s. This is feminism.
Because people have got to know.
Okay? This is the sexual revolution.
Well,
this is a time when society, or at least part of society, wanted nothing more to say that male and female is a social construct. And that in order to gain, full equality, women have to be considered the same as men. And, to have a study such as this study of John Money's, in which he was reporting that this baby who was XY, normal chromosomes, normal everything biologically, but is being successfully raised as a girl because he has a girl's name and girls and dresses and dolls and all, his entire society, his teachers and his grandparents and everyone is reinforcing the idea that he's a delicate girl who likes to cook and, is going to grow up to have babies. I mean, this was huge.
For years, this case was called a medical triumph, but in truth, the case was a failure, devastating the lives of just about everybody involved. This is David, who has remained anonymous until now, only known in the medical journals as John Joan. And you never felt like you were a boy, a girl.
I never quite fit in. I didn't do it because I liked it. I did it because I wanted so desperately to fit in because I was so lonely.
Now, what happened is that this theory of John Money's was accepted over the decades. We didn't find out what really happened with the twins until decades later. And in the meantime, during those decades, his theory became doctrine. Okay, his theory became just baked into, so many fields of both soft and hard science, so that it was standard that whenever you had, for example, an XY or any child that had ambiguous genitalia, if they could be raised as a girl, they'd be raised as a girl. So they'd be castrated, just automatically. Why? Because of the great success, because of what John Money proved to us. And so lots and lots of boys all over the world. I mean, this was written into the textbooks of endocrinology and the textbooks of genetics. I mean, this became truth, so to speak. Not that there weren't people, other scientists that were standing up and saying, John, this isn't proven yet. Let's look a little closer. This is not necessarily the case. But what did he do? He wouldn't tolerate that. John Money, was a tyrant. He would not tolerate another psychologist or biologist or geneticist standing up and trying to publish something that would challenge his great gender theory. He would arrange, he would intimidate the editors at the scientific journals to not publish those articles. It's a lot of what's actually going on right now is very similar.
Right.
So, so what happened with the twins is that after decades, in fact, John Money wrote a book in 1997 in which he said yet again that his twin study, that his gender theory had been confirmed and supported by the results of this experiment with the twins. And the following
one person experiment, by the way, a one-person experiment.
Yeah, but even that one person, it didn't work. Okay, so in 1998, what do we call him now? Not Brenda, not Bruce, but what happened is that we discovered that he stood up and he said, he just blew the cover of this whole thing was a hoax. And his name was now David. Brenda had become David. And he was not only a man, but he was married to a woman with, and he had adopted 3 stepchildren, and he worked as a janitor in a slaughterhouse.
Right.
So that was David Reamer, and people can go onto YouTube and hear him being interviewed about his experience of what it was like to be told for 14 years of his life that he's a girl, and to never, ever, ever feel that was his truth. What happened is that during all those years, he was not happy with his dresses and with his dolls. He wanted to go play with his brother's toys. He wanted to pee standing up. He wanted to, he was rough. He was so boyish and aggressive that kids called him cave woman. Okay, they made fun of him because the way that he walked and his gestures and his interests were all so masculine. And he was a miserable child, and the family was miserable. And on top of everything, when the family was going back for those yearly visits to Johns Hopkins with Dr. Money was sexually abusing those twins.
Okay, how?
He was forcing them to undress and to mimic sexual intercourse, and he would say, this is what men and women do together, and he would, humiliate them and show them pictures. And the point came, why did they stop going down to Johns Hopkins? The boys refused to go. They refused to go back to see Dr. Money, and the parents couldn't understand why.
He was quite the stunning creep, all things considered. Now, the Johns Hopkins also closed that clinic down, eh? Not how long after these revelations emerged did they close down? Well,
then that would have been Dr. Paul McHugh, who was a giant in this area, and he had the wisdom and the foresight, to understand what was going on. There were some studies that were done that would follow up on the individuals who had the sex reassignment to see how they were doing, and those studies showed that they were still really suffering. They hadn't necessarily benefited from that surgery and that sexual reassignment. So, and he wrote about that in a great book, Dr. Paul McHugh, his book called The Mind Has Mountains, and he wrote a chapter called Surgical Sex. explaining how we would be wise if we pay attention to their psyches.
It was also a devastating blow to the reputation of the psychologist whose groundbreaking research on David had influenced a whole generation of scientists.
It became public knowledge, and actually it's not even to this day such public knowledge, unfortunately. When it became public knowledge, and a book was written by John Colapinto called As Nature Made Him, the boy that was raised as a girl, and it just told this entire story from A to Z. It's a shocking, shocking story, and everyone should read that book. So by the time that book came out in 1999 or 2000, it was already, that theory was already baked into sex education and sociology and psychology and look, I have a book, Dr. Peterson, I have a book that was published in 1998 for kids. I brought it with me, show and tell. This book came out. It's called My Gender Workbook. And it has on the cover, the picture here is half a Barbie and half a Ken. Okay. Obviously a book for young people. And the entire premise of this book is that the gender binary is false, that we do not all fit into this category of male and female, and they're not talking about hermaphrodites or intersex, okay? They're talking about none of us. No one fits into it. It's oppressive, and we need to rebel against it. So clearly written by, the author is Kate Bornstein, an individual who has had a very interesting gender journey, going back and forth, born as a male, then a female, then back, and then neither. And this individual, Kate Bornstein, in 1998, again, I want to emphasize how long ago this book was available and written for young people to challenge them and to indoctrinate them with the idea that society is placing on you these false restrictions. Society is telling you that you have to be a boy or a girl, and that is that is something that it's like racism, it's like sexism. It's a terrible thing.
It's patriarchal oppression.
Yes, and we have to break
in its purest form.
So, you have to understand that this is very enticing for teenagers who want to believe in something and want the world to be a better place. So this is presented as another evil that exists in society. So, and this book actually was recommended by, I'm going to say, I'm not sure, the American Psychiatric Association, or maybe it was the American Psychological Association, one of those major professional mental health organizations, way before the DSM acknowledged gender dysphoria was not a disorder. So let me just be clear. A book like this, and an individual such as Kate Bornstein, who had a very active schedule, speaking on campuses, public appearances, all over the place, being made into a celebrity. This is all happening at a time when psychiatry still considered this a disorder. I mean, on paper, not identifying as male or female, and not identifying, with your biology in a way that's consistent with your biology, was still called at that time a disorder. Okay, this is 1998, the APA only changed the DSM in 2013. So this is 15 years before that. So what I'm trying to say is this.
Now, what happened to David Reimer? What happened? David Reimer committed suicide eventually, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yes. So that's the denouement of that particularly tragic case.
And his twin.
So not only was this a failure, it was and go ahead.
Oh no, it was a disaster, terrible disaster. He committed suicide, and his twin brother died of an opiate overdose.
2004,
before him. His twin died first. The entire family was, what kind of words? Traumatized. It's not enough. Trauma is not enough to describe what that family went through.
My parents didn't know a lot that was going on. And if they would have known, it never would have happened. By me not saying anything, the medical community was under the impression that my case was a success story. And I was shocked when I heard that people thought that my case was a success story.
So what we should point out here is that this experiment couldn't possibly have gone more cataclysmically wrong than it did. Right? Not only was what Money was saying was not true in the technical scientific sense, it was an anti-truth, and he falsified the data, and it culminated in the death of two people, the demolition of a family, and the perversion of an entire culture. That's John Money's legacy. And
he never publicly acknowledged it. He never publicly acknowledged that the twins had, that one of the, I don't know what John Money died, I think, in 2006, and I think he had dementia. But when the book came out, and when John Colapinto's book came out that just exposed this whole calamity, there was nothing from John Money. He was still alive. He could have made a statement. Nothing.
David's death was a shocking close to one of the most extraordinary sagas in modern science. Born a boy, he'd been turned into a girl called Brenda.
I'm angry. What's gonna happen to the kids and the youth? And there's so many people who regret this. There's more and more and more coming out, and younger too, and puberty blockers. It does damage. It makes me so angry. And what we're gonna get is a generation that's screwed up. When we get 30, 40-year-olds that are going to be like, what the f did I do when I was 16 or whatever, and you can't go back.
At this point, I identify as a non-binary person. Any pronoun is fine. If you see me as a man, that's fine. You can call me he. If you see me as a woman, you shouldn't. I'm not a woman. I thought I was one, but I'm not. And sorry, honestly, I just don't know what else to say. And
I do not fucking regret surgery. However,
I sound like a dude, but I'm not. So I transitioned for a few years, and I've been off hormones / detransitioning for a couple of years. Here's the deal. When I went to transition, I had to go to counseling to get a letter of referral to a doctor. She wrote me the letter of recommendation. I took it to a doctor, and this doctor prescribed me testosterone on the first visit. I was a legal adult when I made these decisions, but now my issue with this is that they're allowing these things to happen to children.
This is what happens when you give a woman testosterone for 5 years. And I talk about being too far gone. This is what I mean. This is how deep my voice is. It's gotten deeper over time, and it's settled. This is what I mean by hair loss.
the trans community lied to me.
When I look back, I don't think I would have ever even considered seeing myself as a boy without these social aspects, especially if I hadn't joined these online communities. Before the beginning of this period, there was nothing about gender.
This boy just got top surgery, and he's sitting there boobless. I'm sitting here boobless.
There was literally a period of a few weeks to a few months. I started out as an ally, and then eventually I was already starting to identify as transgender.
I was born biologically female. I began transitioning and taking hormones when I was 18 years old. Growing up, I couldn't pinpoint what my issues were, and then I realized that it might be a gender issue. When I turned 18, I did go to Planned Parenthood. I just stated that I had gender dysphoria, and they gave me testosterone a week later. Before I went on hormone therapy, I wasn't required to see any therapist or any sort of a doctor at all. So about a year and a half after I was on hormones, I decided to see a therapist about getting approval for top surgery. I walked in on one appointment for half an hour, and then she emailed my insurance for approval, just like that. Even at this point, when I was passing as a man, I still had these doubts in the back of my mind that said, what if you're wrong? What if you made a mistake? I decided not to do the surgery. I decided to detransition and live my life as a woman again. Even as an adult, it took me a long time to figure out who I was and who I wanted to be. Kids especially need to see a therapist before making any sort of permanent medical decisions like going on hormone blockers and surgeries especially. I mean, they don't even know what they want for dinner the next day, let alone what gender they are. These days, if you tell a parent if their child thinks that they might be transgender or has gender dysphoria, to wait and really consider it, maybe seek other therapy, you're just seen as transphobic now because you're not accepting people.
Okay, how often did you go see your therapist, and what actually happened during the so-called therapeutic process?
I would say maybe about like once a week to once every 2 weeks. And, you know, I would talk about, it's hard to remember so far back, but I remember nothing really ever came out of the appointments. Like I would tell him like, oh, like my phone got taken away and I don't really have like any contact with the outside world, for example. And he would just be like, oh, okay, how are you dealing with that? And I'd be like, you know, not very well. And he would just say, okay, and not really do anything about it, not really offer me anything at all. And eventually, I'd say after maybe like a month or so, he maybe got fired or he transferred somewhere else because he wasn't there anymore. And then I got sent to another therapist. And roughly around that time, I expressed to my parents that, you know, I'm not really satisfied. I want to go through with a medical transition. I want to go on hormones. And they actually pushed back on this at first. They were very cautious of this. They didn't know why I was pushing for it so much, and they wanted me to wait a little bit because at this point in time I was only 13 years old. I was quite young to be doing such a thing, and they stayed that way until I got my gender dysphoria diagnosis. And during one of the appointments that they were there for, I can't remember who exactly it was. It was either a therapist or a nurse, I think. Somebody who was involved in my transition. They told them that, like, oh, this is pretty much the only means of treating dysphoria. There was like no regards to any alternative treatments. You know, my dad asked like about the regret rates, and they said like, oh, they didn't even, I don't think they even used the word detransition. They said like, oh, there's less than a 1% to 2% regret rate. And they also told my parents that if I wasn't allowed to go through with this, then I would be at risk of suicide.
Okay, so I want to take all of that apart, okay? Because every single one of those statements is a lie. So first of all, the American Psychological Association in their guidelines for gender-affirming treatment makes the case that, and because of prejudice, that there are no good long-term follow-up studies of transgender individuals. Okay, and they attribute that to prejudice against transgender individuals, which is not the reason, by the way. The reason is that there's a very low base rate, or there was, of transgender dysphoria, and the follow-up studies haven't been done in large part because the surgical and hormonal treatment regimen is relatively new. But there are no good long-term follow-up studies, and they actually complain about that. And then a couple pages later in the same document, they say that, well, it's necessary to affirm an alternate gender identity because otherwise the client or patient is at heightened risk of suicide. Okay, so first of all, both of those things can't be true. There's no way that people can know that suicide risk is elevated if gender transition is delayed unless the long-term studies are in place. And they already stated that the bloody long-term studies aren't in place. So that's all just a lie, but it's worse than that. It's way worse than that. You see, gender dysphoria is a variant of the suffering that's associated with negative emotion, depression and anxiety. Now, depression and anxiety are the primary drivers of suicidal ideation, not gender dysphoria per se. And so they're confusing the source. There is no evidence whatsoever that transition of the medical sort actually has a salutary effect on mental health, partly because the long-term studies simply haven't been done. And the idea that we actually know from a research perspective that a child is much safer if they start transition than they are if they don't. That's just, again, that's simply not true. Ken Zucker's work has showed quite clearly that if you just leave the kids alone, then by the time they're 18 or 19, most of them settle into their biological identities. The reason I'm stressing this is because your parents, like many parents in this situation, were put in a very, very difficult position. And I would say it's corrupt to the point of malevolence, what the medical professionals are doing on this front. And that is the insistence, well, would you rather have a live trans child or a dead child? Which is, I don't think there's anything more toxic you can say to a parent than that, because that backs them into a corner. Because their alternatives are then, well, you can let your child go ahead with this absolutely life-altering hormonal and then surgical treatment, or your child can die, and it's your fault because you don't care enough. And parents, they're accustomed to trusting their medical professionals, at least to some degree, and accustomed to assuming that the knowledge they put forward is valid and reliable. And the information that your family was given was none of those. In fact, it's pathological to a degree that's almost imaginable. It's criminal, in my estimation, what you were told. Because there is simply no evidence that any of that is the case. There's no evidence that transitioning kids are less likely to be suicidal. There's no evidence that that's the only treatment path that works. And there's certainly no evidence that there's no alternative to transition or suicide. It's so pathological, I can't believe it. But it's no wonder your parents were pushed into a corner, because that's a dreadful choice for a parent to have to make.
Yeah, they were definitely coerced into it. And after that, they obviously were more open to the idea of me being medicalized. And a lot of what I mentioned, I didn't even know was a problem until recently, until well after I stopped transitioning and I was old enough to really be able to introspect well enough to figure out where it all stemmed from. But it was never explored by the adults who put me on this path. From the research I did online, basically gave me this idea that I was going to become my real self, that I would become a whole person in doing this, and it didn't. It fractured my sense of self even further.
Okay.
And this is something
Why did it fracture your sense of self further? What do you mean by that?
There's a lot to that, actually. I mean, I was basically living a lie for a few years. That was very stressful, and I was trying to uphold this idea I had myself in my head that was false. It was a delusion. I genuinely believed that I was somehow a man, despite being a biological female. And in a lot of ways, I missed out on on certain developments, mostly social. I'm still, I didn't really go through the crucial social female socialization that goes on throughout late middle school or in high school. My dating pool was also affected by this. I was mostly attracted to men. I didn't really have much of an interest in women, but most of the people who were interested in me in high school were women. And the few guys who admitted attraction to me, it seemed very sexual in nature, and it felt like, if anything, I was just like a fetish to them almost. And I didn't want to have anything to do with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds extremely complicated.
And there is also another element to it that I haven't really spoken on before, but I feel like it does need to be said. It is kind of uncomfortable because because of my age at the time, and it's also a very sensitive topic, but I think I did also have some sexual motivations in doing this. I like the idea of the changes that testosterone would bring on to my body. And a lot of feminists and activists who speak about transgender people and detransitioners, they often talk about AGP or autogynephilia, which is I don't know if you're familiar with. Yeah, it's like a man.
So autogynephilia is the fantasy. It's a sexual fantasy generally, and then it often characterizes men who become transsexual and start cross-dressing later in life, and they develop sexual arousal from picturing themselves or acting out being the opposite sex. And so I think some of that, by the way, you talked about the fact that you wanted to have some of the classic male attributes, masculine attributes, right? Like self-confidence and courage and so forth, and that you were complimented when you were referred to in that manner. I think a lot of what happens to these men who develop these sexual fetishes later in life is that there is a part of them that's crying out for exploration of and development of their feminine side, right? But instead of having that happen psychologically and starting to integrate, let's say, compassion and care and concern for people rather than things, instead of integrating those cross-sexual proclivities, they start to act it out as if it's a concrete reality, right? And you were definitely enticed into doing that. But you also said, and don't let me delve into this more than you're comfortable with, but you also said that there was a sexual element specifically. So was there something in your fantasies about what was that? Was that about you being a boy? You said you were still attracted to women. So we brought this up, we might as well clarify it. What was the nature of the interaction with sexuality? I mean, it's obviously relevant.
It was fantasies about being a man, about being male and having masculine attributes to my body, and also a lot of it did involve having a female partner, which I never really explored in real life because I didn't have any emotional attraction to women. I didn't want to have a relationship with another woman, and so I never really cared to actually act it out. But this was, I guess you could say that I did have a female analog of autogynephilia. If there's a word for it, I guess it would be autoandrophilia.
I never fit. I was an alpha female, a sales executive that kind of just didn't fit in any box. When psychologists or somebody that I was in love with or whatever said that I was in the wrong body, I started to think, well, maybe I am. I'm a biological woman that medically transitioned to appear like a male through synthetic hormones and surgery. I will never be a man. Is it transphobic for me to tell the truth? Why is it that a couple hundred years from now, if you dug up my body, they're gonna go, yep, that was a woman, had babies.
Can you tell me about the procedures that you had?
I've had 7 surgeries. I've had 1 stress heart attack. I've had a helicopter life ride with a pulmonary embolism. I've had 17 rounds of antibiotics. I had 6 inches of hair on the inside of my urethra for 17 months. Nobody would help me, including the doctor that did this to me because I lost my insurance. I get infections every 3 to 4 months. I'm probably not gonna live very long.
Was there any real discussion of the risks and the side effects and?
No, there's not. And I know that people want to think that there is, but there's not. The truth is that medical transition is experimental. We have studies that said that medical transition helps mental health with kids. They've all been retracted, modified, changed. But the only long-term study tells us 7 to 10 years is when transgender people are the most suicidal.
After?
After surgery. But that's transphobic to say.
Puberty blockers, which are completely reversible and don't have permanent effects, are wonderful because we can put that pause on puberty. It's like if you were listening to music, you put the pause on and we stop the blockers and puberty would go right back to where it was. The next note in the song just delayed that period of time.
You can just pause puberty.
No, you can't.
And then pick it up?
No, you can't.
In the future?
No, you can't. How many studies do they have, long-term studies, on hormone blockers with children? None. For the first time in history, a marginalized group has a huge dollar sign on the top of their head. Every child that they convince is transgender and in need of medical transition, it generates $1.3 million to pharma. And we're believing a pharmaceutical company, Lupron, hormone blockers, reversible, so they say. Well, the truth is that in 2003, Lupron was sued and deemed a criminal enterprise by the US government. They paid the most fine of any pharmaceutical company at that time, $874 million, wrote a check.
Is Lupron chemical castration?
Yes. We're giving it to pedophiles, aren't we? We're giving it to people that are dying, and we're giving it to kids, telling them that they were born in the wrong body and it's completely safe. We're telling children when they haven't fully developed that all you have to do is medically transition and you fit in. I was one of those kids. It got me at 42. Your child doesn't have a chance.
What do you say to parents? A parent comes to you and says, my 8-year-old son is telling me he's a girl.
They're great. You're gonna have them do an experimental procedure that creates the most suicidal ideation of any other population 7 to 10 years after, transition. And here's what I tell parents. You don't have the right to medically transition your child.
Can kids consent? Do you think kids are capable of consenting to?
No, they're not. Being a parent is loving the hell out of your kids and helping them see around corners. We have 5 children's hospitals in the United States promoting that.
And what?
That's a phalloplasty. That's a bottom surgery. We have 5 children's hospitals in the United States telling girls that they can be boys at $70,000 a pop in a surgery that has a 67% complication rate. That will kill me from infection that I can't sue on. We're butchering a generation of children because nobody's willing to talk about anything. I have 3 kids. At the age that they're doing this to kids. I'm not transphobic. I love my kids, and I love other people's kids, and you should too. This is wrong. on so many levels.
Start with a real basic question. What is a woman?
Woman?
I don't want to assume, but you guys are all women?
Yes, we're women.
So how would you define it, like in the simplest terms?
It is hard. Yeah, it is. It is a stumper.
A woman is someone that likes to be pretty and think of themselves as a delicate creature.
I'm pretty indelicate.
Okay.
I could be a woman too.
Yes, you could.
Defining womanhood is just a project of someone who identifies as a woman.
Yeah, but what do they identify? You see what I'm saying? What do they identify as? They identify as a woman, but what is that?
I honestly don't know.
What is a woman? Can you tell me that? Well, you're at the Women's March. You must have some idea. It all comes down to really one question. Especially women, gender, and sexuality studies. What is a woman?
Why do you ask that question?
I just really like to know.
I guess it's like, why are you asking the question? I think I want to understand sort of why that's so important. So if someone tells
just
you...
to sort of understand reality, you know?
Well, I mean, I think when someone tells you who they are, you should believe them. So if a person says that they're a woman or they're a man, then that's them telling you their gender is. I'm not so sure what social interactions would have to do with maleness or femaleness that would.
Well, I'm not even talking about social context. I'm just trying to start by getting to the truth, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really uncomfortable with that language of like getting to the truth. Again, in social life.
Why is that uncomfortable?
Because it sounds actually deeply transphobic to me. And if you keep probing, we're gonna stop the interview.
If I probe about what the truth is?
You keep invoking the word truth, which is condescending and rude.
You wanted to answer questions about women's studies, and so shouldn't the first answer you should be able to provide is what exactly is a woman?
Well, for me, it's actually a really simple answer, and that's a person who identifies as a woman.
But what are they identifying as?
As a woman.
But what is that?
As a woman.
Do you know what a circular definition is?
I do.
Well, that's how I ended up in court, because I did respond to legal action.
So you called your daughter a she, and you went to jail for that?
It's considered criminal violence to not use the preferred pronouns. It is no different than, let's say, I were to take a broomstick and whack one of my kids over the head. So they were treating it in a similar fashion, that misgendering, mispronouncing my child.
You were making a case a bit. You were making a case a bit that part of the reason the psychiatric and psychological professions, the medical professions, did tilt in this gender-affirming direction was because money's research was taken as gold standard, and the pathology of that research wasn't revealed until like 25 years later. And so that excuses the profession to some degree. But by your testimony as well, all of this started to become pretty public knowledge by about the year 2000, that the money experiment had actually gone cataclysmically wrong. And yet what we've seen on the psychological, psychiatric, and counseling front, medical as well, is a doubling down of the insistence that gender is nothing but something that's socialized and that medical transition is the appropriate move. Okay, so that's all flying in the face of evidence now instead of being supported by evidence. And
children trying to undergo transgender medical procedures.
Tensions are rising within the trans community, and there's a clear answer why: the children.
Dr. Levine, do you believe that minors are capable of making such a life-changing decision as changing one's sex?
Well, Senator, thank you for your interest in this question. Transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field.
They're kids. They need guidance. They need boundaries. All this conversation and talk about allowing children to have body autonomy and rights over their own body, it needs to stop. That goes down a very dark path, very
The
fast.
specific question was about minors. Let's be a little more specific since you evaded the question.
In fact, if John Money were living today, he could never get published with such a theory that he had about gender and biology. I mean, it's ridiculous. We have too much information about the impact of the chromosomes prenatally and the impact of hormones. So we know now that male and female, it's not only different genitalia, not only what John Money pointed out, lactating and menstruating. We have each cell in our bodies, except for cells that don't have a nucleus, which are very few, but every cell that has a nucleus is stamped male or female, and it makes a difference.
Right.
Okay, so there's a female heart. We know now in cardiology that when it comes to, for example, arrhythmias, there's a difference in the type of arrhythmias that a woman might get as opposed to a man. There's a difference in the way that a woman who sustains a very difficult burn, how her body might react to it as opposed to a man. And this is true for every system of the body.
So your point is that not only do you see a gender difference, a sex difference at the chromosomal level, but you see it at the cellular level and you see it at the level of systems of cells,
Correct.
so organs. You see it at the level of broad physiology. We talked about lactation and menstruation and gestation, but there's the entire menstrual cycle. There's the completely different effect of hormones. All of that manifests itself in different perceptual patterns and in temperamental patterns that are sex type to a large degree. And so the point here is that what constitutes sex is instantiated as part of identity at every single level of the hierarchies that people are embedded in, biologically and then also socially, because the social roles that are assigned to men and women are not merely arbitrary, right? I mean, part of what you see with parents is that the manner in which parents socialize their children is much more directed by the children than people had originally presupposed. And so parents who are establishing a genuine relationship with their children use the cues from the child's behavior to govern their interactions with the child. And so more feminine girls tend to be treated by their parents as more feminine creatures and more masculine boys, etc. But the idea that that's all top-down socialization instead of bottom-up influence of biology is utterly preposterous, even though human beings are quite flexible in the manner in which they can be socialized. So,
well, the thing is, kids are being led to believe and parents are being led to believe that you can step in with these very powerful medications, these hormones, and you can deny biology, and you can pause biology, and you can create you can create a persona of the opposite sex without paying a huge price. That is the lie that's being told, that you're not going to pay a price for this. Oh yeah, there might be a few side effects. No.
I mean, like a whole missing forearm, for example, and a penis that doesn't work, and sterility and lowered voice, and decreased bone density and the increased probability of the development of cancer, and no evidence whatsoever that there's any mental health benefit, and all the trauma that you put your family through, and all the regret that's going to emerge later in life when you find out that you're sterile, no ability to breastfeed, and complete loss of erotic sensation in the nipples, and et cetera, et cetera. You mean those risks, those trivial, by the wayside risks that are completely ignorable given all the euphoria you're going to experience when you put yourself in the hands of liars and butchers? You mean that story?
Okay, so this is what parents don't know that they must understand. And they have to understand this before their kid comes home and says, "Mom, I'm not your daughter, I'm your son." They need to know this way before that happens. And that's what I want to do for them.
Yeah. Now, look, the way that the legacy media and the left-wing activists react to a conversation such as ours is to point out that we're scaremongering and that this is this doesn't really pose a threat to, let's say, the vast majority of people, and it's of much more help to the small minority that it's aimed at than it is harm, and that what we're doing is stirring up fear and gaslighting and all the sorts of defensive maneuvers that the radicals engage in. So why do you think it's necessary for all parents, and so this isn't just parents who have kids with gender dysphoria, why do you think it's necessary for all parents to be what would you say, aware of what's going on in the schools? And why do you think that that's of sufficient widespread concern so that your concern shouldn't be just dismissed as conspiratorial delusion, let's say?
First of all, let's look at the numbers just in the past 5 years, 10 years of this explosive growth of individuals who are coming in for treatment for gender dysphoria. So there is a hysteria that we're in the midst of. It's a wave, it's a tsunami. I hope that we're at the crest of the wave right now, but we could just be at the beginning. I mean, just 10 years ago, we had rates of, 1 in 10 to 30 to 100,000 people with this particular disorder. We didn't even have numbers. It was so rare, let's say 20 years ago, it was so rare for a teenager to present as opposed to a little kid or an older person. It was so rare even they were rare, but it was even more rare for an adolescent to suddenly come out with this new identity and with gender dysphoria. So those people were so rare just 10, 15 years ago. And now we have studies showing, 10%, 20% of a high school class in an urban high school might identify as not being male or female. So I don't know where this is going.
Right.
Is it going to 40%? That's why parents have to be aware of this. I would also say, in terms of the charge of fear-mongering, and it's really only a minority of people who are going to suffer, we have no data whatsoever to support that. No long-term data whatsoever. The data that we do have shows us that the regret over this, massive life change and these surgeries might take 8 to 10 years to develop. And Yeah. And I would add that not only does it take time to develop, it takes time to acknowledge it and to come out with it publicly. And the research that we do have...
So do you have any advice?
I was going to say that those people that regret it, they're not going back to the clinics and telling them. There's no one keeping the statistics on them. They're not coming back to their doctors and saying, how did you do this to me? They can't sue. It's too late.
Yeah. So why have you got away with it? I mean, people are canceled pretty hard, and it's really devastating for people to be canceled. Like I know about 200 people who've been mobbed for expressing opinions that aren't in accordance with the radical leftist ideology. Most people respond to that being mobbed and excluded as if they've contracted a pretty damn serious illness, I've seen Jay Bhattacharya, the physician from Stanford who was mobbed for his views on COVID, he lost 35 pounds in 3 months when Stanford basically turned its back on him. And I've seen my colleagues hounded into asylums in some circumstances as a consequence of this. Now, you've been standing up against this for a long time, and you dared to go on Matt Walsh's documentary. Why is it that you've been able to get away with this and to be, so to speak, and to be able to withstand it? What's different in your case, do you think?
Oh, no, I've paid a price. I've certainly paid a price. Years ago, when I worked at UCLA, my first book came out in 2008 called Unprotected, and I challenged the political correctness of what was going on in that student health clinic. I paid a very heavy price. I was shunned. People who I thought were my friends stopped talking to me. After 11 years of very high, positive annual reviews of my work, suddenly, after my book came out, I got a negative review. And eventually I had to leave. I left because I was marginalized.
So why did you continue? Why didn't that stop you? I mean, look, people often apologize, right? They apologize and they backpedal. And you continued moving forward despite the fact that you were facing substantial opposition for your views. Why do you, because this is rare, this is why I'm concentrating on it. You know, lots of psychiatrists and psychologists and counselors know perfectly well that the sorts of things that we've been discussing today are 100% true. They know it, but they will not stand up and say it. Now, you did, and you got punished for it. Why didn't you apologize and quit?
Okay, I think there are two reasons. I'm going to say, number one is that my parents were Holocaust survivors. And all of my grandparents and a good bit of both sides of the family were exterminated, were victims of the Holocaust. So I understand tyranny, and I understand lies, and I understand when dangerous people stand up and say falsehoods, and they are followed out of fear and intimidation. I understand that too well. And I would say the other reason is that I'm a person of faith, deep faith, and I believe that there are eternal truths. And I believe that part of why I'm here in the world is to stand up in my small way when I can, to stand up for truth and to protect especially young people and their families from this terrible darkness of lies.
Okay. Well, that's a good place to end, Dr. Grossman, I would say. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me.
Sports now find themselves in the middle of a heated debate over their policies towards trans women competitors in the female categories of events. New Zealander Laurel Hubbard, the first openly transgender athlete to compete in a different sex category to that which they were born at an Olympics. Her participation in the women's weightlifting in Tokyo last year sparked accusations of unfairness as well as support.
Leah's smart. All the pictures he posts about himself are squeaky clean. However, the photos he likes, the photos he's tagged in by friends, and the accounts he associates with tell a very different story about a very different Leah. His online interactions indicate that he gets sexually aroused by dressing up as a woman. And his online activity is sprinkled with contempt for women left and right. But I'm gonna give you the examples and you decide. See, Leah likes posts about having sexual fetishes for cross-dressing, like this. He likes posts about how his friends get together and have trans orgies. He likes posts about physically beating women. More than once, by the way. Here's another post that Leah liked. And if you don't speak trans acronyms, please allow me to break this down for you. This reference to AGP means Leah isn't trans to be more of their authentic self. They're trans because it's a sexual turn-on.
Do you understand that women have absolutely zero chance of winning?
A woman is winning.
Trans women are women. So I want to come at this from the position of an athlete.
Oh, Jesus.
So I play semi-pro basketball, semi-pro volleyball. So when it comes to like athletic spaces, I don't think that trans women should be allowed into athletic spaces because I don't think it's a fair, I think as female athletes, we work so incredibly hard for the little opportunity there is in women's sports because we're not as entertaining as the men. Sorry, we're just not. And so it's like you're going to take the little opportunity that we're given.
That's 2,000 years of evolution coming right at you. This is where.
I mean,
I'm a Team USA athlete. I was the first transgender man to participate in a men's Olympic trials race.
It's amazing. Aiden, my pronouns are he and they.
Awesome. I'm Chris. My pronouns are he and him. I do not identify with the way that I was assigned at birth. When every person is assigned a gender at birth, that's done by a doctor. As I got older, I realized that what people thought that I was didn't match how I actually am.
Hope is that if I ever have a daughter who is competing in surfing or any sport, and also for all the aspiring young generation of women, to have a bright and promising opportunity in her ambition to be the best of the best woman in her sport. I personally won't be competing in or supporting the World Surf League if this rule remains.
Let me make it clear why this has suddenly become my concern. It is because in America, in 2007, had exactly one gender clinic. One. Anyone care to guess how many we have now? 300. So there are now hundreds of pediatric gender clinics in the US. Planned Parenthood gives out testosterone on a first visit. Depending on the state, it absolutely gives testosterone to minors. Planned Parenthood in Oregon gives it to 15-year-old girls on their own recognizance. They don't even need a parental note. Kaiser dispenses it. So for today's teens, whether they have real or typical gender dysphoria or not, testosterone is easily available. Double mastectomy, known as top surgery, is readily available. No, they do not necessarily need parental approval, depending on the state, and they definitely don't need a therapist note. Okay, so let's talk about the transgender phenomenon. I'm going to start by walking through the major issues and claims about youth and adolescent gender transition, and we'll work our way to the big question, which is, how did we get here? How did we get to a place in which we're all supposed to pretend that the only way you know that I'm a woman is if I give you my pronouns? How did we get to an America in which a 15-year-old in Oregon can begin a course of testosterone without her parents' permission? What is gender dysphoria? Gender dysphoria, the severe discomfort in one's biological sex, is absolutely real. It's also exceedingly rare, typically afflicting roughly 0.01% of the population, and overwhelmingly males, so roughly 1 in 10,000 males, meaning nobody you went to high school with. And it typically began in early childhood, ages 2 to 4. Little boys insisting, no, mommy, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. Boys who were insistent, consistent, and persistent in this feeling that they were in the wrong body. It is, by all accounts, excruciating. I've talked to many transgender adults, most of them biological males, and they describe the relentless chafe of a body that feels all wrong. Now, there are at least 3 separate issues I'm going to talk about today. There are the young kids who have this classic presentation of gender dysphoria, some of whom, the majority of whom, would have naturally outgrown it on their own, and historically did. Others became what we used to call transsexual adults. There's number 2, there is the social contagion currently spreading among adolescent girls, many of whom do not have typical gender dysphoria at all. And third, there are the activists who have already begun exploiting our confusion and our sympathies in order to invade women's protective spaces and destroy women's sports. They are all very different. Okay, so the young kids. Now, traditionally, as I said, these were overwhelmingly little boys. And if left alone, meaning with no intervention either to change their name and pronouns, what we now call social transition, and no medical intervention, over 70% of these kids typically outgrew gender dysphoria on their own. Most would end up as gay men, and some would not. Some would not outgrow it and go on to be called, what we used to call transsexuals. These were not these were not, transsexuals were not people who used to pretend they were somehow really women or were always truly female. They were just people who felt most comfortable presenting as female. I've talked to a lot of transgender adults, and they'll tell you they know that people can tell their biology is different, but their goal isn't so much to fool other people as it is to achieve a level of comfort with themselves. For many, that involves hormonal intervention and surgeries, and I have talked to several who say that hormones they took or the surgeries they underwent brought them a measure of peace. I can also tell you that they are generally holding down steady jobs and are leading good, productive lives. But today, we don't just leave kids alone who say this and let chips fall where they may, letting some kids outgrow their gender dysphoria and others to transition when they reach adulthood. Today, we decide the moment a child seems not perfectly feminine or not perfectly masculine, today we say, I know what this is. This is a trans kid. We take them to a therapist or doctor, nearly all of whom practice so-called affirmative care. That is, nearly all of whom have accepted that it is their job to immediately affirm or agree with the patient's self-diagnosis and to immediately help them medically transition. Teachers affirm young children in school, both by teaching the class that only they, the children, know their true genders, and encouraging kids to reintroduce themselves to the class with their new name and pronouns. Therapists affirm and encourage minors down this path, and even pediatricians do. And the typical next step for these kids after changing their name and pronouns to their friends and classmates is puberty blockers. Puberty blockers shut down the part of the pituitary that directs the release of hormones catalyzing puberty. The most common of these drugs is called Lupron, a drug that was originally used in the chemical castration of sex offenders. To this day, it has never been FDA approved to halt healthy puberty. Now you might ask, why would any parent or doctor do this? Why would anyone stop the puberty in a child, even a child with genuine gender dysphoria, when that child would be highly likely to outgrow the gender dysphoria if left alone? Some say because it's traumatizing to let a child go through the puberty of the sex to which they don't wish to belong. The problem of this, of course, is that in many cases, puberty does seem to have helped children overcome their gender dysphoria. But there really is no satisfying answer to why someone would do this, given that scientists have no way of predicting which children will outgrow the dysphoria on their own and which won't. But the argument that's made is that these kids can't wait. The suicide rates for the trans-identified youth and trans adults are very high, the argument goes, and so we need to get in there and start fixing them as soon and dramatically as possible. But unfortunately, there are no long-term studies that indicate that puberty blockers cure suicidality or even that they produce better mental health outcomes. There are not even good studies that show they are safe for this population long-term, nor that they are reversible. There's a big debate right now in the medical community about whether and to what extent the effects of stopping healthy puberty in adolescence is reversible if these kids later stop taking them. What we do know is that puberty blockers will block all the secondary sex characteristics, sexual maturation, and development of bone density from occurring. We do know that because of the inhibition of bone density and other risks, doctors don't like to keep a child on puberty blockers for more than 2 years. And we know that once a child's healthy puberty is arrested, placing her entirely out of step with her peers, this seems to guarantee that she will proceed to cross-sex hormones like testosterone. In studies, nearly 100% of kids who are put on puberty blockers proceed to cross-sex hormones. And we know that if a child goes from puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones, that child will be infertile. She may also have permanent sexual dysfunction, given that her sex organs never reached adult maturity, but she will certainly be infertile. So the claim that puberty blockers are safe and reversible for this population is not well-founded. And the claim that it's a neutral intervention, just a pause button, they say, without serious downsides, is simply false. We wouldn't accept this level of glib salesmanship in any other area of medicine. Okay, so those are the kids who actually have gender dysphoria. For the nearly 100-year history of diagnosing gender dysphoria, these little kids were what we were talking about when we talked about gender dysphoria. But in the last decade, that thanks in large part to social media, there's been another population that claims to have gender dysphoria. This is a population that never before had gender dysphoria in any significant numbers. In fact, before 2007, there was no extant scientific literature on their having gender dysphoria at all. Teenage girls. This is the phenomenon Brown University public health researcher Dr. Lisa Littman called rapid onset gender dysphoria. And it refers to a sudden spike in transgender identification among teen girls with no childhood history of gender dysphoria at all. Not only have the rates of these girls claiming trans identification risen dramatically in the US and all across the West, over 4,400% rise in teen girls presenting for gender treatment at the UK's National Gender Clinic, for instance. But teenage girls are now the leading demographic of those claiming to have gender dysphoria.
As a non-binary human,
what's going on?
Any relationship to the concept of
the answer is social contagion. One more instance of teen girls sharing and spreading their pain. There's a long history of peer contagion with this demographic, of course. We know that anorexia and bulimia spread this way. And we know that this demographic, teen girls, is in the midst of the worst mental health crisis on record, with the highest rates of anxiety, self-harm, and clinical depression we've ever seen. We know that the population who tends to fall into social contagions is the same high anxiety, depressive group of girls who struggle socially in adolescence and tend to hate their bodies. Add to that a school environment where you can achieve immediate valorization and popularity by declaring a trans identity, and of course, the delicious temptation to stick it to mom. Add further the great many trans social media influencers who can't wait to convince troubled teen girls that identifying as trans and starting a course of testosterone will cure all of their problems. And you have a very fast-spreading social phenomenon. I've spoken to families at top girls' schools that will attest that 15 or 20%, or in one case 30%, of the girls in their daughter's 7th grade class now identify as trans. When you see that, you're witnessing a social contagion in action. There is no other reasonable explanation. These teen girls are in a great deal of very real pain. Almost all of them have dealt at some point with an eating disorder or engaged in cutting or been diagnosed with other serious mental health comorbidities. And now they're being allowed to self-diagnose with gender dysphoria by a medical establishment that's decided its job is merely to affirm and agree with these girls. A medical establishment that has, with regard to trans-identified adolescents, effectively turned its doctors into life coaches. Since my book, Irreversible Damage, was published in June of 2020, more evidence than I ever could have imagined has come out indicating that this thesis is correct. You may not know the name Kira Bell. This is a young woman in the UK, very troubled in adolescence, who was rushed to transition in her teen years and came to regret it. She underwent double mastectomy and spent years on testosterone, only to realize that her problem had never been gender. She sued the National Gender Clinic in England, and back in December, the High Court of Justice examined her case and the claim of similarly situated plaintiffs, and she won. The court examined the medical protocols applied to her, protocols identical to the ones we have in America, and the High Court of Justice was horrified. It was absolutely appalled that a young girl had been allowed to consent to eliminating her future fertility and sexual function at an age when she could not have possibly gauged that loss. She had begun transitioning at 15. This case was called a landmark case in England. It was covered by the Times of London, The Economist, and even The Guardian. It was seen as a real condemnation of the effort to fast track so many young girls to transition. And one of the things the court noted was that the clinic had been unable to show any psychological improvement in the girls it had treated with transitioning hormones. If you didn't read about the landmark Curabell case in the American legacy media, well, that's because they decided to pretend it didn't happen. Just as they continued to ignore or dismiss the stories of the thousands of detransitioners. These are young women who underwent medical transition and later regretted it and attempt to reverse course. A lot of these treatments are permanent, but they do what they can to try to reverse some of the effects. So in America, the teen trans phenomenon gets treated as a conservative issue. That is a political issue rather than a medical one. And so, perhaps the greatest medical scandal of this decade is dismissed as a conservative preoccupation. Finally, there's a third group of people we talk about when we talk about the transgender phenomenon. And this is the group that seems to want to eradicate girls' and women's sports and protective spaces. Many or most of these proponents are not transgender themselves, but they are activists and they are energized. And they do seem to be winning. They promote dangerous bills like the Equality Act, now before the US Senate, which would make it impossible ever to distinguish between biological men and women, ever to exclude a biological male from a girl's sports team or scholarship or a woman's protective space like locker rooms and prisons. And they would do this based entirely on a male's self-identification. All that a violent male felon needs to do is announce his new pronouns and identity, and he becomes eligible to transfer into women's prison wherever such laws are found. We have these laws now in California and the state of Washington, and as you might imagine, hundreds of biological male prisoners have already applied to transfer in. For this third group, it is not enough that we create a separate unisex bathroom while preserving a women's room for women. It is not enough to have an open category for those trans-identified athletes who do not wish to be stigmatized while preserving the girls' team for biological girls. And it is not enough to keep a separate safe zone in a prison for those trans-identified biological men who might be at risk in male prison. No, they are working to abolish all women's-only spaces. They want all men to be able to self-identify their way into them, and they want to do it right now. So these three groups are very different. You have the young children, some of whom do suffer with gender dysphoria. You have the adolescent girls, most of whom are caught in a social contagion. And you have the activists, who are using the other two groups to attack women and to advance their goal of chaos and social upheaval. What these three have in common has nothing to do with real gender dysphoria. What they have in common is that they are all shrouded in gender ideology. Put another way, what they have in common is that they are all soaked in lies. Lies are told about the risks of the treatments we administer to young children, both to play down the very real dangers and to wildly exaggerate the degree to which we know medical transition to be a cure. Lies are told about the researchers and journalists who try to report on the social contagion among teen girls in order to discredit that hypothesis or to stifle its revelation. Lies are told both about the inherent dangers of eradicating women's protective spaces and rights, and to exaggerate the degree to which this is the only way to save a community from suicide. Elizabeth Warren, I think a week ago, said that it's transitioning care, they call it gender affirming care. This is another lie. Gender affirming, it's only affirming your gender. That's all we're doing, is a human right of children. Elizabeth Warren said that. The moment it becomes a human right, every parent who disagrees with it has to worry about their custody. This is coming here. It's already all over Canada. This is coming here. It will absolutely threaten parents' custody rights if they don't go along with it. And when I tell you the parents who call me are politically progressive, the ones who have lost their daughters to this supported gay marriage long before it was legal. They do not have any issue with gay people. They do not have any issue with gay rights. They do not have any issue with transgender rights. They simply didn't think it was right for their daughter. They thought she had other mental health problems, and that's an issue for social workers and therapists. They were undermined by their teachers. They were undermined by the therapists they paid for. They were undermined by their doctors. Everyone affirmed the kid against the parents' wishes.
Okay? It's perfectly normal for 10 years and up. Here's just one page I want you to see here.
For 10 and up, huh?
It's unspeakable what these people have done to our children.
When did that start? When was it decided that we need to start teaching kids about this stuff at such a young age?
So I'll answer that with one word: Kinsey. Kinsey was a social reformer. He wanted to rid society of Judeo-Christian values when it came to sexuality. And he worked very hard to do that, and I would say he succeeded.
Kinsey would be very happy with our culture today. His idea was that children are sexual from birth, that we're all inherently sexual creatures from cradle to grave. He believed that true happiness is found in a life of perverse sexual experimentation, no matter the age.
What came out is that his research was fraudulent.
Kinsey based his fraudulent conclusions on data he collected from convicted sex offenders and child molesters. His research was conducted in prisons, not everyday America. He also performed horrific sexual experiments on children, some under the age of 1. His most influential book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, contains an infamous chart called Table 34, which documents the orgasms of very young kids, including babies as young as 5 months old. But instead of suffering the consequences for his heinous actions, he was and still is celebrated by academia and Hollywood. His ideas form the foundation for sexual education in public schools today.
Hey, do you have kids? And I respond with yes, because it is always super uncomfortable for the other person when I respond with 2 girls and 1 non-binary.
Not been able to produce any milk.
Cause you're a dude!
Because we're gonna supplement the feeding with formula.
Oh, I had to put it over here.
I am fucking tired of TERFs making a mockery of real women. Oh, what? You were born with ovaries? You bleed every month? You have XX chromosomes? Yeah, that's cute.
Excuse me, sir, there's a young man in here.
I told her, excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
What the hell is going on? She said you just would never understand.
Gender-affirming hysterectomy is very similar to most hysterectomies that occur. A hysterectomy itself is the removal of the uterus, the cervix, which is the opening of the uterus, and the fallopian tubes, which are attached to the sides of the uterus.
I'm not into all the other bullshit.
What other bullshit?
The they and them. You're male or you're female.
And you're standing on that.
So mad when I say that. How are you a they? What the fuck does that mean?
People are really out here saying that trans Chuchi is the inferior product. I'm sorry. We have the designer, expensive, bougie Coochie.
The words everybody like you know. That's all. Okay. Thank you, Mom. Love you. You used to do that more flirtingly.
Even more shocking, my neighbor across the street from me shouted angrily at me, blaming me for his child questioning their gender identity.
It's just crazy that he's gone.
I am a transgendered woman. I go by she, her, they, them pronouns. And I can tell you right now, my period I experience every month is very real.
Trans women are women.
So if you're heterosexual and you're a man and you said you wouldn't date a trans woman because it's a preference, that's just transphobia, period.
Cut that out now, or you'll go home in an ambulance.
Yeah, that seems mildly inappropriate for a political discussion.
In my mind, I'm thinking about all these surgeries that I might get one day, that some of which aren't covered by the government or insurance. Moral of the story, if you ever see me doing a paid partnership or a corporate collaboration, if you could just give it a like and a comment.
Anheuser-Busch
Great, because repeat after
has lost
me,
over $6.5 billion of market cap after their embrace of Dylan Mulvaney and trans ideology.
Pay for my transition.
I'm boy and I'm girl. I'm not girl, I'm not boy. I cut both my boobs off, baby. Because she couldn't decide whether to send me to the men or the women's bathroom. So I would just like to say that I am winning gender right now.
Don't mind me, I'm in the women's restroom as a trans girl. Whoop.
Trans rights. This is only going in one direction.
You will respect us.
A transgender female inmate has been moved to a men's prison after impregnating two other biological female inmates. We're talking about Demi Minor.
A transgender teen is now behind bars and faces attempted murder charges in Colorado after threatening to shoot up her former middle school.
I dare you to try and stop me from going into a women's bathroom. It will be the last mistake you ever make.
I'm so tired. I was in a live the other day with 2 trans people who denied this. Out of my way. I disown any trans person who disagrees with this notion. You are not allowed at the fucking table. It's time to fucking fight. Trans genocide's around the corner. Stop debating cis people and we fucking fight now, or we die.
There are now reports of 2 sexual assaults by a gender-fluid boy after 2 girls reported the sexual assaults on school grounds.
It's okay to be angry.
This is a dangerous, violent sex offender, a double rapist once known as Adam Graham. And here is the same person now identifying as a woman, Isla Bryson, a predator who's been detained in a women's prison.
3 children and 3 adults were shot and killed yesterday in a Nashville grade school. The suspect, 28-year-old Audrey Hale, was also shot and killed by the police. Hale is transgender and a former student of the Covenant School, a private Presbyterian school. Police say Hale left a manifesto detailing, quote, resentment for having to go to that school as the reason behind the massacre. Officials have also determined Hale was heavily armed with at least 2 assault rifles and kept detailed plans in preparation for the shooting, including by hand-drawing maps and conducting personal surveillance. So far, police believe Hale shot at random and that no individuals were targeted.
So no, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to show your anger.
A radical transgender group is issuing a statement saying the shooter felt she had no other effective way to be seen than by lashing out, by taking the life of others. Life for transgender people is very difficult. Hate has consequences.
Self-described non-binary shooter, also a member of the cult, murdered 5 people at a Colorado nightclub. In 2019, a trans teenager shot 9 people in a high school, killing 1. That was in Denver. In 2018, a mentally ill transgenderist shot up a Rite Aid distribution center in Aberdeen, Maryland. That massacre killed 4.
We know that transgender people in our society, unfortunately, are subjected to mistreatment. The fact that it's a religiously themed school, could be the origin of a place where they felt rejected.
My gut reaction to this story was, oh boy, just what people needed. Another reason to go bad on people who are transgender and see them as now different in a violent way.
So people are screaming, oh my God, it's a hate crime against Christians. But how about they are the ones that were bullying her first?
A lot of the media is misgendering the shooter.
And I can't help but think this trans man targeted a Christian school that he attended, that he may have had very negative experiences at. How much the anti-LGBTQ legislation impacted his mental health.
The way that the media and the police are misgendering and dead naming Aiden is quite concerning.
Because sometimes when cis people are confused, they can be violent.
Very much so.
Well, we know social contagion is real.
Yeah.
We know that's real. It's a real phenomenon.
Could it be potentially that this person is transgender, was transgender, and with all of the laws being placed, he was afraid that he was going to be ridiculed and put into a box, kind of like the school maybe did when he was younger?
I wonder if the parents of the victims of the Nashville shooting today would still have their children if these trans bills in Tennessee were never a thing.
I will die on this hill. Trans rights are human rights.
Hi. My name is Sarah.
I'm changing
my
my
pronouns
near
are
shade
she,
and
non-binary.
I'm
What does being non-binary mean?
For the influential author of children's literature to be so vehemently anti-trans, and to so